I heard Keith when he said, "Yes, I'm still working on it." No, she doesn't know. Would all my years of careful saving and planning boil down to me losing my livelihood to someone who just needed a nurse and a purse? I should have known. That's the thought I keep coming back to. Not with bitterness, not anymore. Just with the quiet, clear-eyed acknowledgement that the clues were all there, laid out like breadcrumbs, and I was too busy hoping to follow them the right way. My name is Pamela James. I am 67 years old. I spent nearly 4 decades of my life as a nurse, reading bodies, reading rooms, reading situations where everything depended on getting the read right. I have held the hands of people in their final hours. I have calmly relayed terrible diagnoses to families who were not ready to hear them. I have noticed the particular silence that falls over a ward at 2 in the morning, and known from that silence alone whether the night was going to stay quiet or turn urgent. I know how to pay attention. And still, I missed it. Or maybe I didn't miss it. Maybe I saw the signs and filed them somewhere soft, somewhere I didn't have to look directly at them. That might be the more honest accounting of things. Either way, the result was the same. I let a man named Keith Morrison walk into my life, my home, and my careful future, and he almost took everything away. I met Keith through Marianne, a mutual acquaintance of ours from church. Marianne is one of those warm, well-meaning women who believes that every unattached person of a certain age is in need of rescuing from themselves. She isn't wrong exactly. She's just a little too enthusiastic about being the one to do the rescuing. She mentioned him the way people mention things they're excited about, casually, but with their eyes watching for your reaction. There's a gentleman I think you'd enjoy meeting. Keith. He's 68, retired, very pleasant. Good sense of humor. Lovely manners. I said I'd think about it. Then, because I had learned by then that thinking about things too long usually meant not doing them, I said yes. Keith was, as advertised, pleasant. That was the word for him. Pleasant, in the best possible sense. Not flashy, not performative. He remembered what you'd told him and asked about it the next time. He held doors without making a production of it. He had a steady laugh, the kind that didn't need an audience to sustain it. On our first dinner, he asked me about my nursing career with what seemed like genuine curiosity, and then actually listened to the answers. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in years. There is a particular loneliness that no one talks about honestly. The loneliness of a woman in her late 60s who has built everything she was supposed to build, who has arrived at the quiet and comfortable life she worked toward, and who finds that the quiet is a little too quiet. I had done everything right. 40 years of nursing, careful saving, a financial advisor who called me methodical and meant it as a mild reproach. I had worked out, with that advisor, exactly how long my money would last, through to about age 94, accounting for inflation, including 1 international trip a year and 1 smaller one within the country. I had planned for everything. I had not planned for the particular ache of having no one to tell about the plan. So when Keith arrived, warm and attentive and interested, I did not examine him too closely. I was ready to be found. That is the honest truth of it. The first months were easy. We settled into a rhythm that felt, if not passionate, then steady and real. Dinners at my place, Sunday church, long walks along the waterfront when the Miami evenings cooled down enough to make them bearable. He made me laugh. I cooked for him and didn't mind the doing of it. Around the 6-month mark, he started mentioning the future, not in a formal way, not with a ring or a speech. More like he would let a thought float to the surface of a conversation and see where it landed. We get along so well, Pamela. Don't you think? I can't remember the last time I felt so comfortable with someone. He said, "It would be something, wouldn't it, to be able to see each other every day?" I laughed the first few times. 6 months was too early. I said so, and he nodded pleasantly and didn't push, but he kept returning to it, the way a river keeps finding its way around a stone. Not insistently, just persistently, and I began slowly to take the idea seriously. We were both 60-something. Time was not infinite. I had watched enough of it pass in hospital rooms to know that better than most. What was I waiting for, exactly? I was cautious, but I was listening. That, looking back, was exactly what he needed me to be. Then, one week, he was gone. A text message, brief and apologetic. His sister had needed him urgently. He had to go out of state. He would be back as soon as he could. He was sorry for the short notice. He would make it up to me. I wasn't alarmed. People's families required things of them. I sent him a reply wishing his sister well, and then I went about my week. When he came back, he looked tired, worn down in a way that went past the surface. His color was a little off. He moved with a kind of careful economy, like a man rationing energy he wasn't sure he had. I asked if he was all right. He smiled the pleasantest of his pleasant smiles. "Just tired. It was a lot, helping her. You know how it is." I said that I did, and I set it aside. But there was another thing. A smaller thing, the kind that accumulates over time rather than announcing itself at once. Keith had never once invited me to his home. In 8 months, I had never seen where he lived. There was always an excuse, delivered with just enough apologetic warmth that it never quite landed as strange. He hadn't gotten around to cleaning up. There were repairs being done. A water issue. He thought it was almost sordid. They were treating for pests. He didn't want me around all those chemicals. Each time, I accepted the explanation and filed it and moved on. I am a nurse. I have learned over 4 decades to tolerate a certain amount of discomfort without immediately acting on it. Sometimes you wait for the full picture before you respond. It is a skill, and it serves you right up until it doesn't. The phone call happened on a Thursday evening. I was in the kitchen, finishing cooking a meal we were going to share, something I'd been making since before he knew me, a recipe I'd refined across years of cooking for other people. I could hear him in the living room, the soft murmur of an ordinary evening. Then his voice changed. It is a subtle thing, the way a voice changes when a person is on alert. As a nurse, you learn to hear it even at a distance, even through walls. It drops a little. It gets careful. I heard him say, "Yes, I'm still working on it. No, she doesn't know. All right, talk to you later." I stood very still for a moment. Then I put a neutral expression on my face, the expression I had used in hospitals more times than I could count, the face that says nothing is wrong while everything recalibrates behind it, and I walked back into the living room. "Was that a call?" I asked. His face did something I had never seen it do before. For just a moment, behind the pleasant surface, there was a kind of watchfulness, calculating almost. Then the pleasantness returned, smooth as water closing over a stone. "Just my son," he said, "checking in." We ate dinner. I told him how good it was to see him. I asked about his week. I laughed at the right moments, and the entire time I was sitting very quietly with what I had heard, still working on it. She doesn't know. I did not break things off immediately, partly because I wasn't certain. I told myself that I might have misheard, misunderstood, taken something out of context, partly because I had learned over many years that acting before you have the full picture often means acting wrong. I reached out to Marianne instead. This required care. Marianne was more Keith's friend than mine. She had known him longer. If I said the wrong thing, she would mention it to him, and he would have time to prepare his explanations. So I kept the conversation light and friendly, as though I were simply catching up. "Things are going great," I told her. "I really enjoy his company." "How is his sister doing, by the way? He had to help her out recently. I know it was a lot for him." A pause. "His sister?" Marianne said. "She lives right here in Miami. I just saw her at the grocery store last week. She seemed perfectly fine." I made a vague, understanding noise and changed the subject. I didn't want Marianne's eyebrows going up too quickly, but inside, the pieces were shifting. He hadn't been at his sister's out of state. He had been somewhere else. And the week he disappeared, he had come back looking gray and careful, like a man who had been through something he wasn't ready to name. The following Friday, Keith called to cancel our date. I had been looking forward to it. A quiet dinner, nothing elaborate, the kind of evening that had become its own comfortable ritual. When his name appeared on my phone, I answered, expecting to hear what time he was picking me up. "Pamela." A slight unevenness in his voice. Not much. Enough. I'm so sorry to do this. Something's come up. I'm not going to be able to make tonight. Is everything all right? Fine, fine. Just something I have to attend to. I'll explain when I see you. I noticed that he did not say when that would be. I noticed that he did not offer an alternative date. I noticed the pauses between his sentences, small gaps where a man who was telling the truth would not have needed to pause. Of course, I said. Rest up. You're too good to me, Pamela. That was the last thing he said before he hung up. I stood holding the phone for a moment, then set it down and finished my evening alone. I went to church that Sunday the way I always did, early enough to find my usual seat, third pew from the left, close enough to hear clearly, far enough back that I could observe the room. The congregation was full that morning, the kind of full that happens when the weather is fine and people feel called to be somewhere together. The minister, Reverend William Crane, was a man who had been leading that congregation for nearly 20 years. He was not a dramatic preacher. He was precise and warm, the kind of man whose words landed quietly and stayed. When he moved into the pastoral announcements near the end of the service, the births, the illnesses, the intentions, the room always settled into a particular attentiveness. That morning, he folded his hands over the pulpit and said, I want to ask this congregation to hold our brother Keith Morrison in prayer this week. Many of you know Keith. You know his spirit, his humor, the way he always has a kind word ready. What you may not know is that Keith has been carrying something heavy for some time now. His health has presented him with challenges, serious ones, and those challenges have not been getting easier. We ask the Lord to be with Keith in whatever he faces in the days ahead, to give him strength, to give him peace, and to remind him, as we remind him now, that he does not face this alone. He paused. Let the room breathe. Let us pray. I bowed my head with the rest of them. I folded my hands in my lap. I kept my face exactly as it needed to be. But inside, something had gone very still. Health challenges, not getting easier. I thought about the week he had disappeared. I thought about how he had looked when he came back. The grayness, the careful way he moved, the economy of energy in a man who had previously seemed easy in his body. I thought about the phone call to his son. After the service, I made my way to the back of the church, where I was helping with the preparations for the fish fry. It was a fundraiser for the scholarship fund, a good cause, one I had contributed to every year, not just with money but with my presence in the kitchen and my willingness to set up folding tables in the heat. I moved through the work the way I always did, efficient, unremarkable. But I was listening. Two women I knew by sight more than by name had positioned themselves near the drinks table, the way certain women do at church events, close enough to the activity to appear useful, close enough to each other to continue a conversation that had clearly started elsewhere. You heard the prayer, the first one said. She was a stout woman in a yellow dress, her voice low and unhurried. His heart's been bad for a while, longer than most people know. How long? Said the second. More than a year from what I understand. He was in the hospital just this past week. Didn't want it to get around, but you know how these things travel. The hospital, this past week, the week he had called to cancel. Something I have to attend to. I set a stack of plates on the table and moved to the next task. The sad thing, the first woman continued, dropping her voice another register, as though the potato salad might be listening, is that he's been in that rooming house on Clement Street for going on 2 years now, and they're raising the rent again. Lord knows what he's going to do. A rooming house? The second woman's eyebrows went up. I thought he had his own place. That's what a lot of people thought. I carried a tray of rolls from one end of the table to the other and did not look up. A rooming house on Clement Street. 2 years, the repairs that were never quite finished, the fumigation, the water issue, every excuse he had offered, every gentle deflection when I had come close to suggesting I drop something off, or pick him up from home rather than meeting somewhere. The picture he had painted of a man with a home, his own space, his own life, neatly parallel to mine. None of it was true. I sliced a lemon into a pitcher of water and kept my breathing steady. He was in the hospital last week, his heart, a rooming house, raising the rent, and then, as clearly as if someone had written it across the tablecloth in front of me, She doesn't know. I'm still working on it. The working was done. The picture was complete. I finished my shift at the fish fry. I helped clean up. I said my goodbyes warmly and drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. I needed to think. He had heart disease, congestive heart failure, if I had to name it. And as a nurse for 40 years, I did not have to stretch very far to name it. I thought about the shortness of breath I had noticed on our longer walks, the way he would slow down and suggest we sit for a while, always with a pleasant reason. I thought about the swelling in his ankles, subtle but present, the kind I had seen hundreds of times in the ward. I thought about the lightheadedness he had mentioned in passing, explained away as the heat, as skipping breakfast, as the dizziness of happiness when he was with me. I had filed all of it. I, who had built a career on noticing exactly these things, had filed them away as incidentals and moved on. And I understood in that quiet, clear-eyed moment exactly why I had filed them. I had wanted him to be fine, and so I had arranged the evidence until it said what I needed it to say. He had never told me he was sick. He had never told me he lived in a rooming house. He had told me he had his own home, not in a single declaration, but in the soft, accumulating way that assumptions get built, through omission, through implication, through the careful management of what I was allowed to see. He had been working on something. She didn't know. And the thing he had been working on, the thing she didn't know, was a future in which Pamela James, retired nurse, careful saver, a woman alone with a 4-bedroom house and a plan that lasted until 94 years of age, would become his solution. Not his partner. His solution. I had heard the phrase before, usually from the kind of people who said it with a knowing laugh, the way you acknowledge something cynical and true. A nurse and a purse. Almost funny given the circumstances. I was angry for a while. I gave myself that because it was earned. I had spent 40 years in service to other people's health and well-being, and I had spent 20 of those same years in a marriage that asked more than it gave. I had come out the other side of all of that carefully, deliberately, thoughtfully. I had planned a retirement that was mine, entirely mine, mapped out in spreadsheets and conversations with a financial advisor who sometimes looked at me with mild wonder. I had not planned to be someone's contingency. The anger burned, and then it cooled, and underneath it was something sadder. I thought about Keith, not the man who had managed and maneuvered, but the man who was sick, who was frightened, who had looked across his circumstances and decided that honesty was not available to him. I thought about what it must feel like to be 68 years old and ill, watching a future you hadn't prepared for arrive ahead of schedule. I could not make myself hate him. I am not built for sustained hatred, and I have seen too much of what illness does to people to deny the fear underneath his choices. But I also knew myself well enough to know this. Sympathy and self-sacrifice are not the same thing. Compassion does not require consent to be deceived. I was not signing on for this. I called him on a Wednesday evening. I had thought about how I wanted to approach it. Not with cruelty, that wasn't in me, and it wasn't what the moment needed. Not with extensive explanation. Clearly, calmly, with the same composure I had brought to difficult conversations in hospital rooms and family meetings, and all the other places where I had had to say true things to people who didn't want to hear them. He picked up on the second ring. Pamela. Warm, easy, the pleasantest of voices, as though nothing had shifted, as though the ground under both of us was still solid. Keith, I said, I need to talk to you about some things I've learned, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish before you respond. A small pause. Of course. I know you've been in the hospital. I know your sister didn't need you that week. She lives right here in Miami, and she was perfectly well when Marianne saw her. I heard the conversation you had with your son the night we had dinner together. I know you live in a rooming house, and I know you've been managing a heart condition for some time now. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones we had shared over dinners and evening walks. This one had weight to it. Pamela. I'm not finished, I said, gently, but firmly, the way you say it in a ward when someone is about to make a decision based on incomplete information. Let me give you everything first. I also know, I continued, that you've been talking to your son about a plan, about something you were working on, something I didn't know about. I've had a lot of time to think about what that plan was, and I think I understand it. Another silence, then, I can explain. I'm sure you can, I said. Go ahead. He gathered himself. I could hear it. The careful breath, the assembling of words he had probably been preparing for some version of this moment. The hospital. Yes, it was my heart. I didn't want to tell you because it was early. We were just getting to know each other, and I didn't want you to see me as a sick man, as someone who needed looking after. I wanted you to see me as I am, not as a patient. I said nothing. And the rooming house, Pamela, I'm not proud of it. I made some mistakes in my life, financial mistakes, and I've been dealing with the consequences. I didn't tell you because I was embarrassed. I didn't want you to think less of me before you had the chance to know me. It was a reasonable accounting, delivered with feeling, and some of it was probably even true. And your son? I asked. What were you working on? A beat too long before he answered. I was telling him things were going well with you, that I was hopeful, that I thought this might be something real. Keith. I kept my voice even. I heard the call. You said she doesn't know. What was it that I didn't know? Silence. Was it the heart condition? The rooming house? Or was it something else? The shape of what you were hoping this would become? Pamela, I have real feelings for you. That has never been anything other than genuine. I believe you, I said. And I did partly. Feelings and intentions are not always the same thing, and a person can have one without the other being clean. But feelings don't account for the rest of it. You didn't tell me you were sick. You let me believe you owned a home. You were planning a future that I would have had a significant role in without ever giving me the information I would have needed to make that choice. I was going to tell you. His voice had shifted now, softer, something more raw in it. I just needed the right time. I needed you to be far enough in that the other things wouldn't matter as much. There it was. Not a confession exactly, but close enough. I let the moment sit. I understand that, I said finally. I understand the fear behind it. I've sat with people who were sick and frightened, and I know what that does to a person's reasoning. I'm not calling you to be cruel to you, Keith. I want you to know that. Then what are you calling to say? I'm calling to say that I can't be part of this. What you were building, the version of us where I come to understand the full picture only after it's too late to change direction, that isn't a partnership. That's a trap with good manners. He inhaled sharply. A small sound. Then, quietly, that's not how I thought of it. Maybe not, I said, but that's what it was. He tried once more, not with argument, but with something more like appeal. His voice dropped to something genuine and tired, the voice of a man who was sick and alone and had been making calculations he wasn't proud of. I just didn't want to be alone in this, he said. That's the truth of it, Pamela. I didn't want to face it alone. And that I understood completely. The wanting not to be alone, the willingness to bend the truth in the direction of the story you needed. I had done a version of it myself, filing away symptoms I should have read because I had wanted the good version to be real. I know, I said. I understand that more than you might think. But I needed the truth to make my own choice. You took that from me. That's what I can't get past. A long silence. The kind that means the conversation has said what it needed to say, and what remains is just the settling. I'm sorry, Pamela, he said at last, quietly, without defense. I know, I said. Take care of yourself, Keith. Please. Then I said goodbye and I set the phone down. I sat with the quiet for a while after that. The thing I kept returning to in the days that followed was not how I could have caught him sooner. It was how I had gotten into the situation at all. I had wanted a partner so badly that I had stopped being myself. I had put aside the part of me that reads rooms and hears silences and follows the thread of evidence where it leads, because that part of me would have disrupted the story I was trying to live. I had been so careful with my money, so careful with my time, so careful with every practical thing. And then, in the one area where carefulness might have saved me some trouble, I had gone soft. That is what loneliness does. It doesn't make you stupid. It makes you want something more than you want the truth. I knew the wanting. I did not begrudge myself for it. I was not going to spend the years I had left turning that wanting into a liability. I had a trip to plan. I had a life meticulously laid out that still belonged to me. I had a house that was mine, a savings account that was mine, a retirement that was mine. I had earned all of it, slowly, across decades of showing up and working hard and taking care of other people. Now I was going to take care of myself. Not harshly, not with walls, but with clear eyes and the full use of the mind that 40 years of nursing had built in me, the mind that knew, when it was paying attention, exactly what it was looking at. I made a cup of my favorite lavender chamomile tea with a spoonful of honey. I stood at my kitchen window and watched the Miami evening settle into dark, the kind of dark that is never quite dark here, the city always glowing at its edges. I thought about what I knew, and what I had learned, and what I intended to do next. Then I drank my tea and went to bed and slept without difficulty. Some nights that is enough. That night, it was everything. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe.